welcome to what is our very first Leaders in Conversation event. And I'm really excited to be launching it tonight, and particularly launching it with our guest, Colin Koen. And Colin, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself to the audience a little later. But thank you that you've put up your hand and that you are launching it with us this evening. It really is an awesome experience. Thank you very, very much. Just before we dive into the conversation, Colin, for the benefit of those of you who are on the call, Leaders in Conversation is really a platform we're trying to create, where we bring leaders of diverse industries, diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences into a room like this, where we can, as I want to say, almost as normal people, just connect with leaders, authentic individuals who are prepared to tell us their leadership story. A story which inspires, a story which in some cases may challenge us, and Colin, in this evening, a story that we trust we can also learn from. So thank you again for being part of the launch and kicking it off with us this evening. Colin, I know that you're a seasoned leader. You've been around the block for a very, very long time, and just a little bit that I know about you, I have a sense that you're a leader of integrity and a leader that people actually can really connect with, and somebody who is really authentic in how they lead and how they demonstrate what they believe to be true in terms of leadership. So with that as introduction, would you mind just saying hello to everybody and just telling us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Thank you, Crispin, and thanks for a very kind introduction. I hope I'm able to live up to that expectation of inspiring. So just a quick introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be the first leader in your Leaders in Conversation events. Just a bit of background. I started my own business consultancy or training consultancy in 1990, many years ago, when the world was a very different world to what it looks like today. I have been involved in leadership and management development, performance management, strategic consulting for the last 3 decades, and have had the privilege of working in so many companies and industries and with so many great leaders around our country, in Southern Africa, and also elsewhere in the world. And then about 10 years ago, I decided, I don't know whether it was a midlife crisis or what it was, but I decided I was going to become an expert in coaching. I studied coaching for 1.5 years and qualified as an executive coach. And it really has fundamentally changed everything about the work that I do. Just from a personal perspective, I moved to Cape Town about 16 years ago. Best move I ever made. I'm married and have 4 children. So that's pretty much me, Crispin.
Fantastic. So if my maths is right, it's spanning a career of almost 30 years since that you've actually been out there doing what you're doing and engaging and working with leaders across the world, as you say.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Thanks. So Colin, with that in mind, back to Colin, because it really is us wanting to hear about your thoughts on leadership, and the topic, we'll get to that in a second, around how do we lead in the new normal. But just what is leadership for you, Colin? Who's Colin the leader?
Well, I think it's quite a difficult question to answer, because I think my leadership is slightly different to what others might imagine leadership to be. While I have led teams and departments and projects in my career at various stages, most of my leadership happens in facilitating development events, training programs, leading of change projects, and coaching sessions, both for individuals and for teams. I think I'm constantly leading others through their own change, if you like. And I think as a leader, what I've been challenged to do in the last couple of years is to really be very aware of the challenges that are facing leaders today in a very changing business and economic environment, and just trying to keep staying ahead of the kinds of challenges that they are faced with. Secondly, developing interventions that equip leaders not only with the skills and insights and knowledge to manage in that world, but also then to support them in navigating their way through a very tricky and new and uncharted world. And I think third is really, and it's probably one of the most important today, is challenging leaders to unlearn so much of what they've learned up till now. Because as you'll hear later on, I think that leadership has changed so fundamentally that we cannot rely on the old principles and what we've relied on for so long. And so unlearning is going to be one of the key principles for leaders going forward.
I just love how you, sorry if I may interrupt, I just love how you kind of just, saying leadership isn't within a formal hierarchy. It isn't in boxes and wires and in job titles. Leadership is everywhere, and it could also be leadership that's influencing into a system or into an organization and into the leaders in an organization. And I'd love to circle back to that just now again, if you don't mind, around the challenges and what is it that we need to unlearn? Because it's an interesting concept. We do a lot of leadership development, teaching, learning, and there's an interesting debate. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Yeah. But I just like your reference to what are those elements that we need to unlearn. And if you don't mind, I'd love to come back to that in a little while. Sorry, did I interrupt you, Colin?
No, not at all. I think the part of the challenge for leaders in communities, leaders in organizations, leaders of churches, leaders of political groups, leaders in every walk of life, and leaders as parents as well, because I think parents do play a leadership role. We've really got to rethink this leadership or our mindsets around leadership. And I'll just share with you personally, the effect that it's had on me. In the last 2 years, I've really been forced to, for the first time, start considering all the things that I teach leaders, I help leaders with, I coach leaders through, I've had to very much apply to myself. And when COVID hit almost exactly 2 years ago, if you think about it, in 2 days' time, it'll be exactly 2 years that we went into lockdown. Wow. The biggest change for me was having to go from 100% face-to-face in my interaction with clients. I coach face-to-face, I consult face-to-face, I do leadership development programs face-to-face, and all of a sudden everything was online. And I think while for many working online has been very useful from a meeting perspective, it threw up a number of challenges when it comes to coaching and doing some really personal development work with leaders. I also had to become, and I'm going to put in inverted commas, an expert in taking material that I for so long delivered face-to-face, and all of a sudden I've had to put this into an online model. And if you think about, well, when I thought about it, the vulnerability I had to go through of all of a sudden being videoed and recorded and putting my stuff on something that is there for posterity, and it's really kind of it's down once and for all, was hugely vulnerable. And I can only imagine then what other leaders are going through in their own vulnerability and dealing with change. Even though my change was fairly small, just had a sense of what they must be going through.
Lovely. So there are two areas I'd like to connect back with you on a little later, is around vulnerability and unlearn, and it's two themes that kind of resonate with me as well.
Yeah.
Colin, just before we move on, part of leaders in conversation is, and I like the fact, or thank you for mentioning communities and community organizations, is also giving back in a way that matters and has meaning. And so for the benefit of those of you who are on the call, part of the proceeds of this evening's event does go to a charity or a cause of the guest's choice. So it's our way of actually giving back, and in a way plowing back into worthy causes. So Colin, if I may ask, have you identified somebody or an organization you'd like us to gift with
I have, Crispin, and I think my decision came around something that I decided very early on in COVID, and that was going to be gratitude. And I can be deeply grateful for the situation I was in. I was surrounded by family, but there are so many homeless people out there. Poverty is a painful part of the South African fabric. And COVID just exacerbated that. And I think that it's often children that struggle the most, particularly children from broken families, with parents who are struggling to make a living, who are losing out. And so the charity I chose was the Terra Community School, which is a local nonprofit organization established in 1999. And really what they were set up to do was to intervene in homeless situations or with children at risk, to provide them with transport, meals, education, social support. And in the context of this topic, I think that if we don't invest in children, particularly in their education, we are going to have a vacuum in leadership in future years. And this investment in children today is definitely an investment in the leaders of tomorrow. So that's is really where I'm going to be putting the proceeds of this session.
Well, thank you. Really, really, really awesome. Thanks, Colin. So let's circle back to this evening's topic, which is leading in the new normal. Just in conversations I have with leaders, it comes up a lot, the new normal, the new normal. There's a lot of pressure for organizations and their staff to return back to the office and return to work. And it's almost as if we flippantly sometimes think it will be as it was. I was speaking to a pastor the other evening, and he was just sharing their struggle of how do we get our congregants back into the pews again? How do we fill up our churches again? And what I'm hearing him saying, without saying it, is, I want things to be as they were. I want some normality, as it was, as he correctly said, 2 years ago. But is there something like new normal? I mean, does it exist? Is it a wish? Is it? I don't know. What are your thoughts on new normal and this need we have to return to something that we had at some point in time, but may have completely lost by now?
Crispin, I'm going to make a bold statement, and I don't believe there ever will be a new normal, full stop. If you just think about the word normal, and you look it up in a thesaurus or you're online, you'll see normal implies consistency, predictability, order, the same, stability. And I think that leaders around the world who use the word new normal are desperately craving this new normal, because it gives them an opportunity to plan for the future, to strategize things that they've done well in the past, where predictability, there's a predictability or a predictable set of skills and knowledge that can be applied to organizations, where you can go to business school and learn a set of skills that will last you for 10 years, and where things are controllable, and where success can be defined and achieved. Sadly, however, I think exactly the opposite is true. There are no rules today. We don't know what's going to happen next, what disruptors are not only going to hit our own business, but our clients and our workforce. And so I think this realization, the realization that there is going to be no more new normal, there's just going to be new different. This realization, I think, is probably one of the most difficult yet most important starting points for leaders today. And I think it's one thing that I would really like leaders to take away from this session, is to realize that the new normal is not going to be normal, and that embracing a different and a constantly different is really going to be the starting point for them developing as leaders in this new environment.
Okay, so help me just figure this one out, please. So no new normal, but a new different.
Yep.
So how do I understand what will be different as a leader in my organization or in my nonprofit or in my community organization? And how can I link back to your earlier comments around unlearning and vulnerability in? I actually must be honest, I haven't heard that term "new different" yet. It's a new concept. So you me struggling with it. So what does that really mean practically? New different what? Different how? Different in what way? And here I am as a leader, and I have this desire to want to go back to something that I knew at some point. Yeah.
Well, let me kind of unpack this new different, because
please, I'd really would like that. Yeah, please.
Yeah, in 1987, we had this new phrase coined, the VUCA environment. And it's quite
Yeah.
interesting that in the last year, I've heard it more and more. And yet
Mm.
it had its origins in 1987. And you think
Exactly.
VUCA is, you look at the words, they volatility, which is certainly what we're facing, uncertainty, we don't know what the future is going to hold, massively complex worlds in which we are operating, and a very ambiguous world. And I think that leaders are having to reinvent themselves in order to ensure that their organizations, their businesses, their teams can survive and thrive in that world. And so can I just share with you one example of this?
That'll help, yeah.
There's been some amazing work that has been done in the world of reinvention fairly recently. And it's a growing field of expertise. And if you look at the research that's been done in this area, they go back only 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, the life expectancy of an organization, of a business, was measured in around 75 years. Organizations could pretty much continue what they were doing. The life cycle was over a 75-year period. And so organizations halfway through, when they were in the peak of their life cycle, would be able to then stop and rethink and reinvent. The experts are now saying that the estimated time for reinvention today is 2 or 3 years. And that means that organizations don't have very much time to stop and think about what the future is going to look like and how they're going to reinvent. And I think the one thing that's come out of this is, if you speak to the experts, they say that reinvention cannot be an event. It is something that leaders are going to have to think about and implement all day, every day. And so community leaders, political leaders, organizational leaders, family leaders are really going to have to think quite carefully and adopt this. And I love the word embrace. It is embracing this new way of constantly thinking about, how can we do this different? How can we think about this differently? What are the challenges? Where are they? How can we anticipate them quicker than our competition, just so that we can survive and thrive? And we don't have to look very far, to see evidence of that this is true. And I just, I wrote down in preparation for today, I thought, what is it that puts leaders of today at the greatest risk? And I think it's a mindset. So if you think about leaders who still adopt the idea that the future is just an extension of the past. So the future will just be an extension of the past. And past success will guarantee future success. So if we've been successful in the past, I'll be successful in the future. If as a leader, I have climbed up the corporate ladder, I've become a leader in an organization, I just have to keep doing what I've been doing in order to be successful. That's the second one. The third one is that organizations are big enough and successful enough not to fail. Probably one of the biggest challenges for organizations today. And I'll give you some examples of where that went spectacularly wrong. And the fourth one is that any obstacle can be overcome because we have been so successful, and we just need to do better what we've always done before. So we take what we've done before and we just become better at it, and we'll be able to overcome every obstacle. And I think that's a huge risk. And so, as I've said, leadership is faced with this challenge of not only adapting to this new different, but instead embracing a world of constant change, of disruption, of building capacity in the organization and a capability within the organization to constantly be reinventing. So strategy has moved, I think, from looking out into the future and saying, hey, where do we want to be in 5 years, 2 years? What are the strategic drivers? Those days are gone. The strategy now is, regardless of what the world throws at us, how can we develop within ourselves to be resilient, change healthy, change fit, and build a capability and a capacity for constant reinvention. And I remember a quote from Joel Barker, and Joel Barker was kind of really ahead of his time many years ago, because he put a series of videos together on paradigms. And one of my favorite quotes, which I'm reminded of, is this quote that says, when the rules change, everyone goes back to zero. Your past success guarantees you nothing. And if you think about some of the examples, Nokia, when the rules changed about mobile phones, Nokia went out of business. The Swiss watch industry, who they had 86% dominated the world's watch market, became almost non-existent when digital watches came into existence and Casio took over. Kodak has gone out of business. Blockbuster has gone out of business just by this perception that, you know, if we've been successful, we'll always be successful. When the rules change, and the rules have changed, everybody will go back to zero. Every leader, every organization will go back to zero. And this is not only going to require reinvention of organizations, but of individuals and of leaders as well.
Yeah, so hang on, I'm just trying to, so there's a new different, yeah?
Yeah.
I understand the concept of organizations who need to reinvent themselves so that they can stay relevant and profitable and market share and shareholder returns and all of that. Your last point is something I'd just like to just stay on for a minute, if you don't mind, please, Colin. What does it mean at a personal level as a leader if we say leaders need to reinvent themselves? And I'm reflecting back to your thought really about what we need to unlearn. And your point now is we go back to point zero when the rules change, when everything changes, we're back to point zero.
Yeah.
So just help me just figure out and work through this concept of what does it mean for me as a leader in my organization, in my business, in my family, if we're thinking about, yes, organizational reinvention, but at a personal level, what does that look like? And where do we start?
Well, Crispin, if I may, I'll share with you what happened to me. When COVID-19 hit South Africa 2 years ago, I had no idea the impact it was going to have on my family, on my wife's business, and on my own consultancy. For 2 years prior to that, in both of our businesses, we had invested huge amounts of time and energy building our presence in the hospitality industry. And this was an industry that by all indicators was going to be the greatest growth area in South Africa.
Yeah.
And so our strategy, I thought, was really good. And we became very successful at doing that. I built a number of clients in the hospitality industry, and so had she. Lockdown hit, and the hospitality industry literally stopped dead in its tracks. It has been the hardest hit industry, and for the last 2 years has struggled and is yet to get back onto its feet. And this, in addition to having 4 children at home, all trying to navigate the challenges of homeschooling. And as I say, I'm extraordinarily fortunate in the resources we had. But I really, as lockdown rolled on, I slowly began to develop what it might sound a little silly, but a 5-point strategy for myself on how I was going to survive this. And I'll share with you my 5-point strategy. Number 1 was, how do I stay positive and busy and in action every day? And I remember my brother sits in San Francisco. He's 4 years younger than me. He's a very wise young man. And he said to me, Colin, you need to set yourself some tasks and challenges that you achieve every single day and get them done. Because as long as you are in action, things will unfold. So that was my first point. And I think it's true for every organization. Number 2 was, how do I stay on the radar screen of my clients? Because if I'm not in action and I'm not out there doing the work I do, my clients will forget me. And so I started to do a whole bunch of work free of charge. Now, if you think about that, it goes absolutely counter to everything that business is about. And yet, if your strategy is to stay on the radar screen of your clients, you have to do these things. And I was doing some extraordinary work, but I made sure that I did free work in support of my 3rd strategy, which was to learn a new competency every day that would help me stay ahead. So I learned how to do online videos. I learned how to edit my own videos, do voiceovers, music cut-ins. I did all sorts of creative, wonderful things, and then did those free of charge within organizations because I was learning and I was staying on their radar screen. Strategy number 4 was, how do I reach out and maintain relationships with clients and my working network? So I made an intentional commitment to myself that every day I would connect with 2 either clients or people in my network just to say, hello, how's it? How are you doing? Just so that I connected with people out there that were also grappling with the stuff I was grappling with. And finally, I had this idea that every crisis comes with opportunity. And the interesting thing, Crispin, was I think the universe is kind, because just when you need one of these quotations, it kind of lands on your screen. And I don't remember where it came from, but Roll Emerson said that you never let a serious crisis go to waste. And boy, we were going through a serious crisis. So how do you allow a crisis not to go to waste? And he said, what I mean by that is it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. And so I asked myself, what does this pandemic give me an opportunity to do that I've never done before? Gives me the space to do that I've never done before and explore things that I've never done before. And so one of my favorite models, and it's a model that I'd love people to go and look up, is the Ikigai model. It's the philosophy of Ikigai. And I didn't know it as Ikigai when I went to research it. I've always known it as the hedgehog theory, because it was that's how I learned about it. But Ikigai is this principle of knowing what it is that you have a God-given gift for, that you are fanatically good at doing. You just have a skill that's in your genetics, in your bones. You just have a skill to do it. That's the first circle. The second circle is, what is the thing that you really are passionate about? You have you wake up in the morning and you feel excited to go and do. You read books on, you look at YouTube magazine, YouTube videos on, you read magazines and articles on. It's something that you would invest personal time in looking at, your passion. So what you're good at and what you're passionate about. The third circle is what adds value to other people. What is it that adds value to communities, to your world out there? And the third one was, what has a commercial model around it? What can you make money from? So what are you good at? What are you passionate about? What adds value? And what can you build a commercial model around? And if you take those four circles and you overlap them, the sweet spot in the middle is your Ikigai. It's that's what you've got to focus on. And for the first time, the pandemic gave me an opportunity to sit down and say, Colin, what are you really good at? And how do you know that you're good at it? Where have you received feedback that allows you to know that? What are the things that you are passionate about, that you read up about and you invest your time in? What adds value and how can you add value now in this crisis? And finally, how do you build a commercial model around that? And those were really guiding principles that allowed me kind of to lead myself and my consultancy through an extraordinarily difficult time. That's kind of really what sat behind it. I hope that's kind of useful.
Lovely, and I want to hold that thought and come back to your 5-point plan that you mentioned just now. But if I may ask you, what was your Ikigai? What was that in that sweet spot? What was that really carried you through this reality that you've just described? Your business, your wife's business, and all of that. If you could share that, please.
Sure. Let me start with the passion side, because it's quite interesting that when I looked at it, so much of my work.
Excuse me, I sneezed.
Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
So much of my work and time and energy, the books that I read, you see a bookcase behind me, is filled with books around psychology, the psychology of performance, the psychology of behavior. I'm an absolute avid fan of neuroscience, of the work that was done by David Rock and his team in neuroscience in leadership. I love the work around vulnerability and shame that Brené Brown did. I've read all her books. I can sit and watch those kinds of videos for hours. That's kind of where my passion is. And I think we invest personal time and we are drawn to things which we are passionate about. So that was where the passion's at. The bigger challenge for me was I wrote down everything that I've ever done over the last 30 years, and I ended up with a list of 40 plus items, everything from crisis management to conflict management to strategy to team building to everything. And I thought to myself, but what am I really, really good at? And I remember one of my clients who actually turned out to be a really good friend, or ended up being a really good friend of mine. He had said to me at the end of one training program, he said, Colin, you are at your very best when you're on your feet in front of a group of people, sharing your passion. And I thought back to that thread. And so training, development, coaching teams was really where my sweet spot was. And I think those two things, if I combine those and put it into, so how do I add value to people with those, really guided me as to what I'm doing most of my time now. And it emerged a new organization for myself. And I absolutely love what I'm doing. And I've shared a whole bunch of stuff that I was good at, and I did, but I wasn't really my sweet spot. Yeah.
Thank you. That kind of helps me understand your 5 steps again, because I was just wondering about the one where you said you did a whole lot of stuff free for people just to stay in the network. And now it makes sense, and I understand that. Colin, if I could come back to the five steps, and you were talking about it as an advisor and as a consultant into an organization.
Yeah.
But I just want to reflect back on them, and they make perfect sense. So setting really concrete goals for the day, that which I can achieve. I'm hearing that come through. Staying on the radar screen of somebody in an organization. It may not necessarily be their clients, but it could be their stakeholders, people who are important in terms of influence into where they are as leaders.
Yeah.
Learning a new skill, a new competency is I think a really good idea. And you mentioned some lovely examples there. I think part of that is probably also learning how leadership has changed and what a new paradigm is around what it means to be leading in an organization as complex as many people find themselves in. And seeing crisis as an opportunity. It's that one's hard to do. I mean, we get sucked into a crisis, and sometimes we can't actually see the wood for the trees. So it is a good reminder for us just to and I think it ties back to your earlier point around mindset.
Yeah.
And how do I think about where I find myself. As you were sharing that, a question that came to mind for me, Colin, is what you mentioned earlier, and if I may, I hope you don't mind, put you on the spot a little.
Go for it.
You mentioned, and you said you're lovely and you're comfortable in front of people on your feet, so I'm quite happy to do this. You mentioned unlearning earlier. Colin the leader, Colin the father, Colin the spouse, Colin the business owner. Any examples of what you had to unlearn as you were navigating yourself through what I get a sense was a really, very complex and challenging and trying period?
So I've got 2 answers to the question. The first is that I had built an entire career on the designing and crafting of packaged solutions that are delivered to leaders in organizations, across Southern Africa and elsewhere, which were built around some solid truths around leadership, management, etc. And I literally had to park all of that because so much of that, while useful, and I think forms a basis or foundation for understanding management and leadership, doesn't really address the real challenges of the new world. But my second part of my answer, I thank the universe every day for my coaching, for having gone into coaching, because one of the core principles of coaching is that we have to, as coaches, we have to give up knowing. Let me just unpack that for a moment.
Just say that slowly. We have to give up.
We have to give up knowing.
Knowing. And we're expected as leaders to know everything and have the answers. And
exactly. Yeah. Okay. So when we go into a coaching session, we have to consciously choose to give up knowing what the solution's going to be. Give up knowing what the client needs. Give up knowing what the solution or the process that's going to. We have to almost enter that conversation with a blank slate, and allow what is required to emerge, what needs to emerge just through the conversation, just through listening. And so when I talk about unlearning, you can't really unlearn, because once it's in your subconscious, it's there, it's learned. There. But we do need to compartmentalize it and box it and say, all right, how do I engage in a conversation with my children, with my clients, with leaders, with in my coaching sessions around leadership or around schooling or around challenges in a way that emerges and creates a solution and crafts a solution through the conversation. And it has to come from a place of not knowing. I always remember Brené Brown saying that creation comes from a place of nothing. You can only create from a place of nothing. Otherwise, it's just a reinvention or a remodeling or a re-engineering of it. It comes from nothing. And so, sorry, I'm being quite wandering in my answer. But my answer is really, I think that for me, the greatest value in learning to be a coach is, sitting down with my family and saying, hey, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how long this is going to last. But let's start talking about what this is going to mean for us in the short term. Let's think about, possibilities of the future and how we will respond to them when they happen. Let's think about how we're going to remain healthy. And we ended up as a family running around the swimming pool and doing exercises on the lawn, because that became one of the things that we need to do in order to remain robust and healthy to manage this change.
Lovely.
But had to very much give up everything that we had believed, known, and held on to so dearly in the past. And I think leaders and organizations have to engage with this new world in that way. And Crispin, you and I have spoken about, for me, one of the most exciting things to do is to sit with 10 leaders from organizations and not run a training program for them, not run a session where I've got an agenda or anything, just sit with them and say, guys, let's just think about what leadership could be. What are you facing? What are the challenges? And let's allow leadership to emerge for you from a place of nothing, because that's going to be the real skill going forward. We're going to reinvent just by having conversations, by listening.
Okay, so you're shifting a lot of. Sorry, I'm just kind of really. So this whole concept of a new different, I think that's something that's really something I think it's really worth reflecting on and unlearning. And I mean, your I don't know how you felt, but when you said giving up knowing, I kind of felt oh my word, I've been in this job for 60 years or 50 years or 40 years or 30 years, the VP, the HOD, the head of department. Giving up knowing, it's giving up power. It's giving up my identity maybe in that. And I'm just thinking about how exposed and potentially vulnerable a leader could feel when we are challenged to give up knowing.
Crispin, imagine if you're
that's really something to. Sorry, sorry.
Imagine if you're the dean of the faculty of business in a business school.
Yes.
And the business school has been built on knowing what to teach leaders. And they develop entire course curriculum. They bring in experts who know about this stuff. And imagine facing a business school leader and saying, in actual fact, the very best you can do for leaders is to give up everything you've known up till now. It would be terrifying. And yet the most valuable conversations business schools could be having at the moment is sitting and just facilitating conversations between leaders who are grappling with navigating and going through the challenges and the vulnerability of this new world. That would be hugely valuable, because they would create they would reinvent as they go along.
Yeah, sure. That's powerful. And I must be quite honest, this whole concept of giving up knowing is again something that I would imagine a leader that's being challenged with that would probably really find it difficult to do alone, and probably would have a need to connect with a coach or a mentor or a thinking partner around what that really means for them practically. Colin, thank you. If I may just look forward for a while as we start wrapping up. I just have a sense that what you're also saying is it's going to require of us as leaders to really dig deep. I mean, we can reflect back to COVID and all of that and where we've been, but so what does the future look like? And I know you mentioned Phuket just now, and the pace of change, and that,
Yeah.
but there may be another pandemic around the corner. There may be, I mean, we're seeing what's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. There may be another, who knows what's waiting for us around the corner. So as a leader, yourself, and if you had to give those of us who are on the call, if you look to the future, let's look, and I know you can't do that too far, but let's say for the next 12 months, 24 months, you've given us 5 steps. You've challenged us to unlearn. You've challenged us to give up knowing. You've challenged us to accept that there's a new different. What do I need? Maybe as a last question, Colin, what would I need in my toolbox as a leader to continue this leadership journey and to continue having influence and impact, and continue really, I know you mentioned reinvent our organizations and ourselves, but for me as a person, as an individual, as a leader, to really thrive and stay afloat, what would you suggest I invest in and put in my toolbox of leadership competencies and capabilities?
Yeah. Well, maybe to answer the question, if we think about the other day, Crispin and I was standing at Exclusive Books in front of the section on all the business books.
Yeah.
And if you just cast your eyes across the titles of those books, and I thought back over the years of how different that experience has been over the last 30 years. We now have a series of books on emotional intelligence in leadership, vulnerability in leadership, leading in the unknown. I mean, there are topics there that we would never dreamt would have been on the bookshelves, even 5 years ago. The second thing is, I think, and I was just chatting to someone in Canada who says the greatest, in all her dealings with her clients, she said, the biggest challenge faced by these clients is they can't get people back to work. How do you get people back to work? I think of things like the Great Resignation. There's been a global resignation where people have for 2 years have sat at home, worked from home, realized that life is more than just sitting in an office, in an open plan office with 100 other people, and are saying, well, I'm checking out, I'm going to go and do something different. We've been faced with things like having to manage millennials and the next generation, completely different mindsets to managing those people, managing a new world of work. And one of my kind of favorite topics at the moment, a very important topic, is managing corporate mental health. The World Health Organization says it will be the next global pandemic, is mental health. And if you look at those things, just resignations, new world of work, dealing with millennials, dealing with global environmental crises, etc., I think the kinds of skills that, to answer your question, that we're going to be wanting to be seeing in developing leaders. And I'd love to see a business school curriculum that deals with things like, I'll give you 10. Okay. Grit and determination. How do you develop grit, the ability to be persevere and to be determined? Determination in the face of crisis. Courage and vulnerability. Giving up knowing and giving up everything that you've believed were skills, etc., is hugely vulnerable, and you've got to be quite courageous to step into that. Number 3, emotional intelligence. We have to connect with people who are in crisis. Otherwise, we will lose them. Organizations are losing senior executives, managers, people at all levels to mental health. And if you lose a chief executive to mental health, they're gone for 5 months. And their integration back into the organization is massively difficult. It's a huge risk. Number 4, reinvention and creativity. We have to develop the businesses that reinvent, and a capability where every single person in the organization becomes a reinvention practitioner. They look at ways in which to reinvent the way they do things. I was chatting today to someone who's in the hospitality industry, and they were talking about standard operating procedures. I'm sorry, standard operating procedure.
For what?
Nothing's standard anymore.
Yeah.
You're wanting, waiters and barmen and, front of to constantly be reinventing around the changing needs of customers and clients. Number 5, I think we need to build organizations that are nimble.
Yeah.
And nimble organizations are small, they move quickly, they're dynamic, they can adapt very quickly to change. Number 6, anticipating disruption. We have to develop a new way in organizations to be able to anticipate disruptions quicker than the competition can. That's going to be the cutting edge for organizations. How can we see it coming quicker than the competition can, and then develop an organization that can be nimble and creative enough to respond? Number 7, mental health. We need to be able to manage mental health. And proactively look for ways to manage mental health. And equipping our managers, our executives, our leaders, our supervisors to help their teams deal with mental health issues. A really uncomfortable and a vulnerable place, but it's an imperative. Number 8, we need to learn to unlearn, the ability to give up.
Knowing.
Yep.
Oh, man.
Number 9, we have to focus on environmental sustainability. It's going to become increasingly important, and I don't have to spend too much more time on that. And number 10, we have to make our organizations change ready. And that's quite an interesting one. How do you make an organization change fit, change ready, build change stamina in your organization? You put those 10 topics into a modern business school, you'll equip leaders well for the future. Because I think they are very dynamic skills rather than rules and templates that will exist for 10 years, because there is no 10 years.
Wow, Colin, thank you. As always, a lot of food for thought. I wish there's a way we could influence the curriculum at our business schools, as you are suggesting, and it's something that I think we should think through. But thank you for personally for me, challenging me around unlearning, thinking about the new different, and the one word that resonates with me as I reflect on this conversation with you, and it's something I know that I'm probably going to struggle with a lot, is giving up knowing. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your investment in this first episode of Leaders in Conversation, and thank you so much for gifting us with your insights and your wisdom. And just from all of us at Boundless Wisdom, to wish you all of the very best in your future endeavors, and please keep on doing the great work that you are doing. And I started saying you're a leader, I believe, of authenticity and integrity, and that came through the whole conversation. Thank you for being vulnerable, sharing with us. And I see your ikigai confirmed in how you were relating your leadership story to us. So thank you very much.
May I share parting words, Crispin,
yes,
before we go? I would hate for anybody who has listened to or is going to listen to be scared by the future. I think the future is extremely exciting, and all we need to do is be authors of that future, to participate, to step up and co-author, co-create, co-invest, and invent that future, because it's where we're going to be living. Thank you, Crispin.
Colin, thank you. For those of us that dialed in, thank you so much for joining us for our first Leader in Conversation session. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We're going to be providing you with a summary of the conversation with Colin, Colin's 5 points, Colin's business school curriculum. So we'll be making that available to you. So look out for that, please. And hope to see you at our next Leader in Conversation session, which is scheduled for May this year. So thank you very much to everybody who joined. Wishing you all of the best. Thank you. Good evening. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Tot ziens. Hambagashle.